So for those of you who don't know, we've had Elise chat with us in the past. And I'm not kidding when I say that I often refer to your talk as like one of the best, if not the best talks. I think it was
Aw,
just the most organized. I think it was the most informative within the time slot that we had. And it was also, I think, like the most user friendly. Like I feel like my mom could understand what you do the way that you explain it.
oh,
Um,
thanks.
so so this is Elise Hathaway. It's not spelled like Anne
Hi,
Hathaway.
guys. It's
That's another
not.
thing. Yeah, like that's something that I feel like is probably really annoying for you. So
Not. It's okay. I mean, I
yeah,
get it a lot, and sometimes I just claim it. I'm like, yeah, we're besties.
so it's Hathaway with an E in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so get it right or pay the price. That threat comes from me, not Elise. So I knew Elise from a figure drawing class that we took at SCAD together when we were
Yeah.
undergrads, and she was the best in the class, in my opinion, like hands down. And we all worked at easels, but she
Yep.
stuck out to me because she was more comfortable on the floor. And
Yeah.
so she was the best figure drawer, and she was on the floor. So it was just like big standout for me in that class. I wish I would have tried to steal one of your figure studies back then. They were always
Oh,
so
I'm sure I've got
gorgeous.
them somewhere.
So Elise is now a visual development concept artist.
Hmm.
And those of you that are interested in this sort of thing should pay close attention because not only is she great at this, like she's great at explaining this avenue of the industry. So ears open, eyes up front. If you like to doodle while you listen, that's also fine too.
Can everybody see?
Yep.
Awesome. So, like you said, I'm a visual development artist. I've been working in the animation, and well, I've been working in entertainment for 15 years. That kind of spans a lot. Right. For most of it, I've focused on feature animation, but I've also worked in video games and I've worked in commercial. I've also done some live action work here and there. So I've kind of jumped around, but feature animation is kind of my first love, and I've always kind of go back to it. Um, Funny enough, I was gonna put something SpongeBob here because that's what I'm gonna be focusing on today is SpongeBob. Obviously, I've got like the yellow hat. But I actually last time I talked here, I did a little doodle right before the presentation that I put on my front screen, and then before this one, I painted it. So I feel like every time I come, I'm just gonna add something to it. All right, so I went to LSU originally when I started in college. I didn't know what I wanted to exactly do, so I ended up doing some graphic design and astronomy on the side. That was like double majoring, and then realized that didn't want to do astronomy because it was a lot of math. And then as I was doing graphic design work, I realized I really just wanted to work in film. And so I discovered SCAD and I transferred there and I focused in animation. College then was a lot different. Our courses were basically everything animation. So you had to learn rigging, modeling, 2D animation. It is really funny when it focuses on one person. I know. So I kind of had to learn the whole gamut of things. So when I left SCAD, I was definitely kind of a jack of all trades, which the industry has kind of shifted to where that's kind of the thing now, which is pretty wild. So as I do biz dev, I kind of cover everything. And as I go through the slides, you'll kind of see that. So here's some of the studios I've worked at over the years. It's a bunch of them. My most recent studio was Sony Animation, working on a to be announced project. It's still hush hush right now, but it's going to be their next big feature that's not a sequel. So that's all I could say. Here's some of the movies that I've worked on over the years, feature animation wise. The one we're going to be talking about today is SpongeBob. So I'm gonna run through basically everything that I kind of worked on the movie, which it was. I started very very early on this movie. It was just me and my production designer. So I actually have a. You're probably going to see maybe, I don't know, 40 to 50% of what I actually did on this film today, just because there was just such a large volume of it. So SpongeBob is very interesting. Everybody knows SpongeBob. He's pretty iconic. Starting this movie was very interesting from just a workforce point of view, like how we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. Because we had three movies before us. We were the fourth, which coming up fourth is always like, oh, another SpongeBob movie, you know? So we had all of that to work from. And then there's also 25 years of the SpongeBob series, which is still airing, which is wild. So we had a lot of discussions on what we really wanted to do. And the thing that we kept coming back to is we really wanted to pay tribute to the original SpongeBob. Kind of the second and third movie, when they got into 3D, they started doing some pretty crazy stuff. They started really kind of tweaking the style and messing with it. And for us and the director, we really wanted to go back to the core original. We wanted to get as close to the original series as we could get. And I'll show you kind of how we did that. So this was overall the art department. It was a pretty small crew. There was like less than 15 of us. And then, our production designer was Pablo Mayer. If you don't know him, he's an amazing artist. If you're interested in biz dev, he's insanely good. Same with Travis Ruiz, who was our art director. The director was Derek Dryman. He was the one of the original writers on the series. So basically, Hillenberg, who created the series, him and he attributes Derek to being one of the main people that created SpongeBob. This is a fun little text I just wanted to show you guys my first week on the project, because it's, everybody knows SpongeBob and I grew up watching it. So I put on there my first week. I messaged my family and I was just like, hey, I'm working on SpongeBob. This is crazy. All right. So this is the start of kind of breaking down the movie. So our big thing, like I said, was how close can we get to the original series? This was the goal, is to get, so you can kind of see on the left, those are some original hand-painted images, because they still do, well, now they do digital painting, but it all used to be hand-painted backgrounds for SpongeBob. And so, one of my first tasks was painting Bikini Bottom, which is pretty daunting. And that was kind of the mission, is like, can I add volume? Can I get rid of the line work? Can I make it a little bit more volumetric and add depth without breaking the 2D? And so this was kind of our first attempt at that, seeing how much more color we can get into it, texture, things like that, to make things feel a little bit more tangible. These are just some one-off shots that we did. I covered pretty much all of Bikini Bottom for the film. I did most of the breakdowns and everything for Bikini Bottom. It was kind of my set. And we realized early on, most of the movie was actually not really going to be in Bikini Bottom. So we basically decided to do one-off shots for everything. So basically similar to the series, working TV wise, we just started making backgrounds for where we knew we were going to shoot. So these are just a couple of the backgrounds that I did for us to they would still be built in 3D. Everything was still built in 3D, but this was basically the rough reference for each one-off shot. Instead of, I'll show you going on how we usually break down a set so that you have the full environment where a director can kind of get in there and shoot and decide what camera work he wants to do. For this, it was just like, okay, we know we're going to film here, here, and here. So we don't need to do that. We can model it directly to what we need. So here's some of that, kind of showing you how we break it down from there. Like I said, for these were one-off shots. So we knew we could build one set to hit all of the one-off shots. So that little sketch up here is kind of showing how, I was like, we could literally just make a wedge and we just turn it and shoot wherever we need to. And then breaking down just kind of the little things that would be in Bikini Bottom. Obviously, it's very aquatic. There's very specific stylistic. We had a SpongeBob PDF of basically the 25 years. I wish I could show it to you guys, but it's very, very, very NDA. But it had 25 years of basically them breaking down the style of SpongeBob. So we had that to kind of adhere to, which helped. And then we also had, since we were working at Paramount at the time, that's where I worked on this film, they had the 3 previous movies assets. So all of the models and everything that were used in the previous movies, we were allotted, so that way we could build from that. We kind of realized early that stylistically those weren't where we wanted to be, but we could use small things to kind of build out our movie. But surprisingly enough, you'd think, oh, they already have rock formations, we could just use the rock formations. But they were so stylized and so kind of further away from what we wanted to do from original SpongeBob that we ended up redoing a lot of that stuff. But small things that like we still could use. So here's kind of the intersection stuff that I built for when we were in Bikini Bottom, street lights, that kind of stuff. This is the beginning of rock formations that we started to build. We realized early on that we liked the idea of keeping it very 2D, trying to hit those quality like look of SpongeBob, but also making things slightly more tangible, similar to like, you know, I guess stop motion kind of tangibility where there's a lot of texture, a lot of feel to it. So we wanted to see if we could get the style of SpongeBob, but just adding something a little bit more tactile. This Krusty Krab. So this was basically after we kind of finished Bikini Bottom. We had a lot of artists come on and we needed to establish what we call a pipeline. And so this was art pipeline, how we kind of decided we were going to move ahead. So for us, we had, like I said, a ton of reference because there's so much SpongeBob content to look at. We also had all the original backgrounds from Paramount that had all been scanned and, you know, documented, so we could pull from those as well. So a lot of it was pulling refs, looking at the boards for each sequence when we had a set, and then basically either using some of the assets that we had from Paramount to build a proxy model, or we would model a proxy set ourselves. Proxy sets weren't necessary for every sequence. We didn't have to do modeling for everything, but it was really helpful because on this particular production, since we had a small group of artists, each artist kind of had their own set. So usually in VizDev, we have a lot of everybody kind of works together. You kind of bounce off each other. One person may be more specialized in different things. And so some person might just be only doing environment painting and things like that. For this one, since we had all of our artists were basically jack of all trades, we each contained our own sets. So we would start from doing thumbnails, doing rough layouts and VizDev paintings, to breaking it down to the props and textures and all of that. And you would just own that entire set, which was really fun, actually. It was fun for a lot of sets because you felt a lot of like you owned that set, like that's you in the movie, like you did it all. I'll show you later where it gets into like, oh man, this is rough, because the longest assignment I've ever had on a movie was on this production because it was my set. It just took a really, really long time. But anyway, this is kind of the breakdown of how it works. And I'll go through kind of more of that as we go. So from the Krusty Krab, you know, I had done an environment paint. I had a 3D model proxy of the set, which I handed off to production when I handed over all my breakdowns. These are a few of the little breakdowns that I did early on when we were working on the movie. These were very specific, like texture paints as well as prop callouts. Interestingly enough, once we kind of established textures in our movie, actually painting textures became pretty obsolete quickly, because once we painted like this is what wood is in our movie, we didn't really need to paint that anymore. We would just say, hey, this is wood now. So from then on, call outs kind of became, whenever we design something, we would just draw it and be like, this material is wood, because we had already established in the movie what specific textures were. And because SpongeBob is very specific and iconic the way it does textures, we kind of had to be very specific to that. So like metal had to look just like the metal here, like it always had to look like that. And so it made the production go a lot faster and easier because we didn't have to paint every single thing. But this was some of the early stuff we did just to really establish textures in our movie. This is the Pineapple House. This is another set that I took on. Like I said, I did most of Bikini Bottom area. And yeah, this was a fun one because, like I said, there's, you know, nothing more iconic than the Pineapple House. We did receive a proxy model of this as well. And it wasn't exactly what they were looking for. It was a lot squattier. It was a lot more illustrative. It was a deviation from the original. And like I said, they really wanted to get back to the original. So this was us kind of playing with, you know, working with the environment and keeping it to the 2D. When I first painted it, guys, there was so much like cinematic attributes that I added to this. Like I had lighting rays, there was bubbles, there was all this atmosphere, like I had props everywhere. I had made it like very flush and cool, and like the sand was all like dunes in the back and stuff like that. And they were like, no, like that looks cool, like it looks very cool, like this is fun and cinematic, but that's not what we were doing. Like we wanted to hit the 2D as close as possible, so we had to rein it back and really break down like, okay, how much depth can we get in space without actually really doing that much. And so the simplicity of the movie like really came into play. And I'm sure you've probably heard from a lot of professors in the past, like sometimes simplicity is a lot harder because you have to be very, very deliberate with everything and where you put everything. This is the interior of his house, same kind of thing. We took the 2D, I built a 3D proxy, and then I basically painted it and started breaking it out. You can kind of see at this point, I'm just drawing the props because I don't need to actually paint them, since we know what the textures look like already and production has already kind of dev'd those. So at this point, we just kind of design, which is really fun because it goes really fast and you can be a lot looser. You don't have to be as tight with everything when you're as you are when you're painting. This is a set that I spent a lot of time and love on. They didn't have a lot of the pieces for this proxy set, so a lot of that modeling I actually did myself because I was really excited and I thought it was a really cool, cute set. And I worked probably, I would say, like 2 to 3 weeks on this location. And then they were like, you know what, we think we're going to cut the kitchen. Like the day that I finished it, like I was going into a review to show all of this work that I had done, like get it approved and ready to hand off into production. And they were like, actually, I think we're going to get rid of this. But I think there is a sequence with him eating the cereal and everything. So that part came back, which I was really excited about when I saw the movie. So that happens a lot, unfortunately. You'll learn, working in film, it's a lot of, you can't get too attached to something because it very often gets canceled or removed. And so you just kind of have to let that go a little bit. Cool. So this is, like I said, it's really fun owning your own set because you get to do everything. When you watch the movie, it's all yours, which is so exciting. And then this is kind of the pitfall of that. Not to say I loved this assignment. It was really, really fun. But this is the longest assignment I have ever had in my career. So we had a sequence in the movie that's basically SpongeBob grows half a barnacle and he becomes a big guy. Like he's old enough to go ride the rides at this theme park, and the one that he wants to ride is this crazy, scary roller coaster that he hasn't been tall enough to ride. And my assignment was somebody has to design the roller coaster. And so this was kind of my first just stab at it. Like we had a couple thumbnails, storyboard department had a couple thumbnails. We knew we wanted it to be epic, ridiculous, similar SpongeBob theme that obviously it's like, this is the death trap roller coaster. And so this was just a quick paint that I had done. But then it was like, okay, now we have to figure out what this thing actually looks like. So these were some of the original sketches and kind of what I was told. I sat down with the director, my production designer, and art director, and the kind of breakdown launch that they gave me is that it doesn't need to make sense. A lot of SpongeBob doesn't. And so there was some reference from SpongeBob that did have some crazy roller coasters in it. And so we looked at some of those as kind of the base start for what we wanted to do. We knew there was a couple of story beat points that we knew they really liked. There was things like a roller coaster basically being shot off of the top of it and it's broken in the middle, and so it just looks like they plummet to their deaths. There was one that was like a fire wheel that happens. So they had a couple of fun beats that they were pretty sure were going to stay in the movie, but otherwise it was kind of open end, hey, just come up with fun stuff. And make it just wacky and crazy and, no basis of reality. So I basically went through and started sketching ideas. And this process ended up going through, story and back and forth, basically like trying to see what they could make gags out of, and then what we could develop visually. And then kind of after that first initial concept phase that we did a bunch of sketches for, they came back and were basically like, well, does it need to make sense? Because if we're riding the roller coaster with them, we want to have a shot that's like looking up to the roller coaster where it's going around. So that means we actually need to build it. And if we have to build it, then we kind of need to make it make sense. And so we started breaking down a little bit more of what specific shots they need. So you can see some of the storyboards that I got from the storyboard team, where they were specifically calling out like moments that they wanted. And so we started trying to figure out how we could build this thing so that you could actually see it and have it work and make sense. So this is kind of the fun part of the job. Like I tell every time I do a talk, like I went and did a talk at UTD last week, and every time I always tell artists that basically doing this job is signing on to be a student forever, because you have to learn something new every single assignment, every single movie that you work on. I know nothing about roller coasters. I mean, I've been on them, I like them, but I didn't know anything about roller coasters, how they operate, how they work. And so then it was like, okay, now I have to learn that. I have to learn how to make this work, how this process whole works. So looking at insane amount of reference for roller coasters was my new job. So then this is probably, I would say, 20% of what we did back and forth. I was on this assignment for over 3 months, which is nuts. And so these are just some of we would go through different pathways of, do we make it make sense? Do we not make it make sense? Do we go crazy with it? Like we couldn't specifically decide on what specific like gags they wanted, like gag moments. They kept kind of changing. And so this is some of the craziness that we went through of trying to figure out what that should look like. And then ultimately we landed on, okay, let's just get rid of the big one shot where everything has to make sense and instead build it go back to like SpongeBob original and go simple and just go for the gag moments. So then we basically decided to take each shot of every gag that we wanted and we would build specifically to that shot, so that gag. So we knew there was a moment, just in the beginning where you saw the entrance and you saw them going over kind of these humps. So we knew we had to build that shot, which would basically be a pan across and then pan up. This is kind of an interesting process, especially for Viz Dev, because we primarily work, we do like a pretty Viz Dev painting, then we break it down. But generally doing kind of like specific shot work where you're building out the one-off shot is much more of a 2D animation process. And so on this movie, we kind of had to jump between. It was almost like sometimes we were working one-off shots doing 2D animation style, and then other times we would do big 3D sets. And so like I said, so this one was me breaking down each shot, kind of showing where they would pan, where they would kind of move and everything like that, and then breaking it down to the specifics, the entrance of the roller coaster, the actual like ride pieces. And then I actually got to do, which is really fun. So if you watch the movie, there's a lot of zip pans that happen where they use it as a transition between shots, where like if SpongeBob moves really fast, they just zip pan. And so because I have done a little 2D animation, because like I said, back when I was in college, I kind of had to learn a little bit of everything. I got to kind of help design how those zip pans would work and did like a couple of little like loops on how the streaks could happen and things like that, and how we used it in the production. So this is my color thumb or my color script for the final sequence and how it plays out. And you can kind of see from this where each of the shots kind of happen in sequence, with all of the zip pans in the back with the cool colors. doing this kind of color work, this color scripting and color keying, is probably my favorite part about the job. It's really fun just because a lot of it is psychology, but it's also, I mean, most of it is psychology. But you also just get to see the movie before everybody else, which is really fun. And you get to kind of decide how that happens. So, you know, it's fun to kind of build emotion and build anticipation and things like that with just color and light, which is, it's such a fun. So this was a fun one where we could really like show him super excited, ready to go on the ride. And then as things go, the lighting just gets more intense and more dramatic, to kind of build out the horror of it all when he gets to the end of the ride. Now we're going to move on to my favorite set of the movie. There is basically, as they're going, if you haven't seen the movie, they're basically going to search for SpongeBob. He gets taken by the Flying Dutchman, and they have to go to the underworld to go rescue him. So the three that are, it's actually changed. Well, no, it's changed from when this was. At this time, Patrick was with the group that was going to save him. In the movie, it's Mr. Krabs, Squidward, and Gary are the ones going to save him. And so they have this vehicle, this like Winnebago boat, that breaks down in the underworld, that they have to go to an auto parts store that just happens to appear in the middle of the underworld. It's very silly. And they basically wanted a really fun kind of Jurassic Park moment where they're in the auto parts store trying to find parts and things like that, and there's this three-headed seagull that's like stalking them like the velociraptor. So there's a lot of shots that are like very like Jurassic Park moment, because we wanted it specific. Even the sounds are very similar because we wanted it to be that moment. And so I got to handle the exterior and the interior of the design of the auto parts store. My production designer, who's one of the best painters that I've ever met, he probably, I think, painted the whole movie. Everything that I've painted that you've seen, he also did a painting of, because he's nuts and amazing. But he did some really cool concepts of the exterior and interior for me to work from originally. So this was just a story beat moment that we did for, I think it was for a presentation for our executive group that I had done, but we had a bunch of viz dev paintings for this set. So this was a huge set. When they told me about it, I had a couple of paintings to work from, which gave an overall like mood and lighting, but I was the person who kind of had to decide like how big is this space? How do they move through it? Which this is some of the original stuff. It actually even got a little bigger, I would say. But so basically the easiest thing for that kind of, when we don't have specific shots that we're going from and they basically need a set working proxy wise, this has become a huge part of my process. Early on in my career, I knew 3D, but I didn't use it super often. But as the industry has kind of changed, things have gotten a lot faster. Like groups have gotten a lot smaller as far as like the team. And so using 3D to just kind of build proxies is such a faster process now. So most artists who work in viz dev do have a level of 3D experience that they use, just because it's just really quick to build out your set. So as you can see on the left, this is kind of the proxy set that I built out, just roughly putting in where I would want placement of things as far as like the racks and checkout counters and things like that. And then on the right is ISO breakdowns. These are really helpful just for production so that they can get an overall view of placement of things. And then it's a chance for me to kind of go through and really specify the style that we're looking for. And then this is more of the, what we call production pages information, where we really break down every single thing. This was really fun for me because I just started sailing with my husband last year. And so we've really gotten into the whole process. Like I'm going sailing in a month. And so I got to put in a lot of like the aquatic fun jokes in there, which I loved doing. So it was really, really cool. But yeah, this was an insane number of props. I thought I was going to break the budget of the film with the amount of props that I was making them build. And so that became a big process as well, as how much reuse we can do, which we do a lot in film. Movies are expensive to make and budgets get crazy. And so usually once we start working on a film early on, you do whatever you want, which is great. That time's awesome. You can come up with anything and they're just like, cool, let's do it. And then as you kind of go through a production, like part of the way through, they're like, oh wait, like we're kind of running out of money, so maybe let's, like, we don't need all of these new things. And so then you start like trying to figure out how to use stuff again, either with like retexturing or whatever. So this was a lot of, we had a high school as well, and so me and another artist were trying to basically find, you can kind of see in a couple spots, you'll see reuse. Me and this other artist were basically trying to tag team and figure out like how we could use the same props within each other's environments, so that way we weren't adding too many props to the cost of everything. And then the last area I'm going to cover is the underworld. These are kind of those are basically the areas that I've worked on. The underworld was really, really cool because, like I said, I started early on in the film, and so we didn't exactly know what we were going to make. Sitting down with the production designer and the art director, they had some ideas, but it was basically like free reign. Like, we need to make something cool. We need to make something kind of creepy. We need it to be in the SpongeBob style, but it needs to be slightly a deviation from Bikini Bottom. It can't look like Bikini Bottom. And so that's where we started to play. This was one of the first paintings I did for the area, where we started to talk about like creatures, and we loved the idea of maybe going a little bit surreal with the whole area, that it's just really weird creatures that are aquatic things. And there was like, my production designer did this really cool paint where like he even went, like, he had a compass that was like melting over the top of one of these like cavernous, like, rock formations and things like that. Like, we were trying to see like how weird could we go with it. Oh, that's the little boat caravan that they go to rescue SpongeBob in. So these are kind of some of the weird, fun stuff I got to do early on. This is one of my, outside of color scripting, this is probably, most artists would say this is probably the funnest. This is like blue sky art, where you just get kind of a brief overview and you just get to sketch and design and paint and come up with crazy stuff. And, knowing that most of it won't land, but it's just really fun to kind of push your brain past just like the, basic stuff, to just anything. And so we basically got to do this for a while, which was really, really, really fun. Just coming up with crazy concepts of what the underworld could look. I had the most fun doing creatures because I think that's just super fun. So trying to figure out ways where we could make creatures that were made of aquatic things. So I think this character right here ended up in the movie, but he, so basically I liked the idea of like, okay, using rope, but make it into a creature. And then this got handed off, all of my concepts got handed off to Thaddeus, who is one of our amazing character designers, who's comes up with the craziest stuff that it's amazing the things he can come up with. And I think him and Alvi, which are two of our character designers, and Adam, they actually just got nominated for an Annie for some of the character concept work they did on this, which is really cool. So these got handed off to him, where he got to basically flesh out like cool ideas, and he came up with the wildest stuff. And then I wanted to show you guys an example of something that didn't make the film, because this happens a lot. There was a really, really cool location called Ghost Cove originally in the movie. And then, like I said, you guys are seeing maybe 40-50% of the stuff that I did for the movie. And like I said, everything I'm showing you is my work for the movie. So even then, it's like a fraction of what was done for the movie. There was basically this Ghost Cove area where when SpongeBob makes it, he's trying to become a swashbuckler so that he can be a big guy. And so he basically like trying to join the pirate crew. And he goes here and he ends up going to meet a sea witch who lives like underneath the docks of this Ghost Cove area. But basically they were like, we want a crazy location that's just an island of ships that are all mashed together, like just crashed into each other. And they gave me the example of there's a Pirates of the Caribbean movie where they go to the pirate like stronghold. That's basically a similar thing. It's just all these wrecked ships that are built up this stronghold area. And so that was like part of my assignment, which you can see on the right, is kind of, this was building out an idea of how we could just mash a bunch of ships together, which becomes a kind of design hard thing to do, because if you still need like points of focus, like areas where your eye focuses on and looks. So it's trying to find a balance between looking at specific things but also filling everything in so it feels like one big shape. So this was kind of one of the concepts I did. Like I said, we went through a lot of different ones. The two in the middle, these are two of the Sea Witch. I have pages and pages of Sea Witch concepts. I decided not to keep those for you guys today. But these were two of the ones that I did. And these top areas over here with the path with SpongeBob, that's him going to see the Sea Witch underneath the pylons, which they wanted to have, having all the, algae and stuff growing underneath. And then this bottom left one is basically, they wanted kind of when they come up to the pier, what would they see kind of on that first area of the pier. So we wanted those to be a little bit more like approachable. You could walk in, kind of look around areas, little businesses and stuff. And that would basically lead, so this Ghost Cove entrance would be kind of where they originally wanted the ship to go in. They wanted to have kind of that front area, which is that little pier area. And then they had the idea of there was going to be a dance battle that happened. It's SpongeBob, guys. It's wacky as hell. They wanted a dance battle that was going to be between the Flying Dutchman and SpongeBob. And they wanted that to take place basically on this big broken up pirate ship that turns into basically a big stage. And so we were trying to figure out ways where we could make it to where you can kind of see on this one, it would be one big ship, but then I had it to where basically like two parts of a different ship. So the whole thing would open up and two parts of a different ship would like make stadium seating. So that way it became a big stage. It was pretty wild. The whole process was crazy. We went through tons and tons of iterations. There's some beautiful paintings that were done for this sequence by some other artists on the production. But ultimately, as they were going with the production and it seemed like it was adding so much of a location that required a lot of build up, a lot of explanation, a lot of development, and it didn't really serve the story as they kind of went on. And so ultimately they decided, like, let's take that area and make it something different, to where basically SpongeBob has to go through these different challenges in order to become a swashbuckler. And so this location was basically scrapped, which was a bummer, but it was a really fun location. This location, actually interesting. It's usually a hot topic that ends up being part of the conversation whenever I do talks, is AI. And this was the first time I encountered AI on a production. So for the dance battle sequence, there's kind of a stage, which I don't know if can you guys actually see my cursor? Yes, no. Okay, cool. So right here, this is kind of like the backstage. Hey, thanks, thumbs up. This is kind of the backstage where that dance battle is going to happen. Like the SpongeBob and the Flying Dutchman were going to come down here and then they dance in the middle. So this area right here was something we had talked about. Like, what does that look like? What does that little stage setting look like where they come out of? And I had been given that assignment. I had done a bunch of I was starting some initial concepts. I was given about 3 weeks to work on that specific area, about 2 to 3 weeks. And the day after I got the assignment, I received some art from one of the higher ups on the production, and he had messed with Midjourney, and he had come up with some concepts for that with Midjourney. And basically those were given to me, and they were like, hey, can you take those and make them, SpongeBob in the style of SpongeBob and blah, 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 which pretty cool. Like, it was actually ideation wise, I was like, oh, that actually helps, because you usually go through a couple of rounds of trying to figure out what, your director, your art director, your production, what they want, and hitting that visual thing that they may have something in their brain and you're just trying to get it out of them. Especially for people in productions who, aren't artistically inclined, they might have some visual, but they don't know how to use the words to explain it. So it was really helpful to kind of get that and be like, oh, okay, this is what they're looking for. And so basically I took that, I got to do a bunch of sketches and drawings. So it was still very much my process of taking that, establishing it. Interesting kind of part about it is, because I had something to work with from the start, what would have probably taken 2 to 3 weeks took a week, because at that point I already had the starting point, I already had the concept done, we knew what we wanted. It was just me kind of implementing the rest of it, just actually going through the process of getting it on paper in SpongeBob style. So that became an interesting kind of like conversation in my head, just like how AI works. It's really great for ideation. It is a helpful tool. But it was one of those things where like, I work contract to contract. I usually work on a film anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And so, if you think about every single assignment that I have, if that was, instead of 2 weeks being 1 week, that's half my contract for every assignment. So my year contract would only be 6 months. So it's interesting, like, that's kind of the good and the bad of it. So that's all I'll say about AI. That's my professional take on how I've experienced it so far. So yes, this is the setting that unfortunately didn't make the movie. It was really, really cool setting. So, but at least I still have the work. So this is kind of how it evolved. Like I said, it was going to be that whole dance battle, Crazy Ghost Cove. Then it became the challenge area. So basically he had to go place to place, do a challenge of some type. There's a bunch of fun gags for it. And then as he finished it, he would move on to the next one and the next one. So I basically started at the original part of this, doing this wedge that you can kind of see in this upper corner. We're basically plotting, this is just one of the challenges that we went through, where basically all of these dead skeletons that are in the ground all come alive when he goes past them, and he has to basically fight them with intestinal fortitude, and basically win that challenge. And so starting out, I do these pretty often on productions, where you plot out, okay, where are they going to go through the sequence in the environment before you start action. We'll have like a painting or two of it, so that this way we can hand this off to production. They know exactly what they need to build, and then these are specific call outs to kind of specific areas. So down here at the pier, this is the area where the boat comes in. This is the actual pathway. They would have basically all the bones and areas here where they actually come to life. And this is the actual platform where once he finishes a challenge, he gets on it, it glows, everything's magical. And then, just texture information. So these production pages, we call them production art on a production. It's one of those, I actually really love doing production art because I have kind of an analytical brain. And so it's really fun for me to kind of break down and think about every question that production might have and figure out a way to answer that for them. So that way they can just make beautiful stuff. And I love getting into the nitty gritty of like, texture specifics and location specifics and where things are placed and things like that. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah, and that's it. That's basically like my little shtick about working on SpongeBob and some of the art. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
So I don't want to take up, this is your time, guys. Like, I feel like that presentation was incredible. There's so much that I want to ask, but I don't want to take away from y'all. So are there any, there should be questions. In fact, let's not say, are there any? Who's the first person that wants to ask a question? Nico.
Okay. So you mentioned like working with a team and having head directors. How exactly do you divvy up work in that situation? And if there are people with overlapping tasks, how do you communicate about those things?
Did you hear that, or do you need me to repeat?
Yeah, no, I heard her perfectly.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, it is that's always an interesting process that kind of changes film to film. So, we have our production designer and art director. Production designer and art director usually cover a certain set of skills. So big things like the overall color script, building out what we call a style Bible, and a lot of the keyframe art, especially if you have a production designer, art director who are incredible, artists, which on this production we did, then they usually do a lot of those keyframe art pieces to help establish style for the rest of the team to follow. So that's kind of the original, like the bulk main, like this is what we're building blocks, what we're going to do, usually comes from the production designer and the art director. And then that's handed off to the artist. The artist, as far as the way that we're kind of divvied up, has changed over the years. When I started in VizDev, things were a lot more segregated. You had character designers, you had environment designers, you had environment painters, you had a prop designer, a prop painter. Like it was very specific, and everybody kind of had their skill set that they sat in. Over the years, the umbrella of what a visual development designer does has grown. So we kind of do everything now. Like I said, proxy building was never something that I did early on in my career. It's something I do almost, every single assignment now. Everything from like character design and everything like that. Nowadays, most visual designers can do a little bit of everything. So the way that they kind of decide how to kind of divvy that up is usually early on, everyone kind of gets tested on multiple different things. You'll end up doing some environment paint, you'll do some production pages, you might even touch on character paint and things like that. And the production designer and art director usually start to feel out the skill sets, not necessarily that you're the best at, but that they need you for specifically. So it might be that somebody on the team, they feel like, they may be an amazing, environment painter, but the style that they're hitting, they may feel like they're seeing something in one of the other artists' works that kind of hits a little better than other ones. And so basically they'll basically start putting artists into specific positions where they know they're going to get what they need specifically for the production. That being said, pretty much every production designer and art director that I've worked on tries to, I guess, level the field where they'll ask the artists what they want to work on, what they're excited about to work on. And then they'll also, as they go, be like, hey, I know you've been doing a ton of production pages. Would you like to take on this set and do a really pretty viz dev paint? Or would you like to take on a color script? And so they'll kind of make sure the artists don't get too set into a specific thing and get bored or get frustrated. So that's usually, it's a lot of communication. It's a lot of talking. It's also, I always recommend to artists, if you're feeling like, as you're working, like, oh man, I feel like all I do is prop pages. If you ask, usually they will find a way to make you get to do something that you really enjoy doing. But in the end of the day, it's usually what production needs is kind of what your job is to feed. If that specifically is doing one part of the production, that's kind of where you'll end up, just because, overall it's always feeding what we call feeding the pipe and getting stuff down the way in the fastest and most efficient way we can. And so artists end up being slightly specialized in specific things. Is that good?
Yeah. Do you have a question, Kaden?
Yeah. Let's say this. What are the pros and cons of a lot of animation today taking from a 2D stylization and 3D animation?
Did you hear that, Elise?
Yeah, for sure. I think, that's kind of I love 2D animation, and I'm actually really excited because I feel like right now there is a shift happening in the industry where there has been a lot more 2D animation coming out, and I'm hoping that continues and that more of that will happen. But I think that the pros and cons of it are, obviously for something like SpongeBob, seeing it in a different way, you're talking about an icon of a character. SpongeBob is iconic whether you see him in 2D and 3D and stop motion. And so I think sometimes the idea of taking a character like that and moving him into different mediums kind of proves the point of it doesn't matter what medium, the character, the writing, that all is basically outside of stylistic specifics. I think SpongeBob himself, the idea, the whole world, everything, tying it specifically to one medium kind of hinders what SpongeBob has become. It's just such a great IP that's so funny that can go between any medium because it's just such a great character and world and comedy aesthetic and all of those things, to where it's kind of cool to see it transcend into any medium possible. So for me, seeing it kind of move between them, like I'm always going to love 2D animated SpongeBob, but getting to see the fact that it transcends that and it can go into any different medium is just such a concrete, like, wow, that is a well written and well like created IP, because it doesn't matter what medium it is, it can go into any medium. And so I think there's some of that that's happening with a lot of different IPs where, you know, some I think are more successful than others. But I think, you know, seeing if a IP can transcend that, it doesn't matter what medium it is kind of neat to see, in my opinion.
William?
You talked about the use of 3D and that being an industry standard for visual development now.
Yeah.
I was wondering, how do you work with these 3D proxies? Do you paint over them, or is it just reference? And how often are you being told to make your own, or are you just taking proxies from other like 3D artists and stuff like that?
And I'll add, did you hear all that, Elise?
Yeah, I think I heard it all.
I'll add to William in what has been the learning curve for you for that in terms of throwing yourself into software.
Yeah, I mean, I did Maya in college a little bit, and so I knew how to get in there and navigate and things like that. Like I said, when I first started in the industry, it wasn't something that was pretty like prevalent, that was used very often. And so, but then over, I would say probably the last 5 years or so, it's become a lot more commonplace on all the productions that I've worked on. And so it was kind of getting back in, remembering, watching some tutorials and things like that and getting back into it. I'm actually right now, like I said, I've learned Maya, so that's what I'm comfortable in. It's what I've used a lot, but now I'm teaching myself Maya, Blender, because I already knew Maya. So I've been learning Blender as I go, just because it's becoming a little bit more of an industry standard. It's also nice that it's free. And so I've been working in that and trying to build up my skill set there. And then also on my last production at Sony, the previous department used Unreal to previs, which was kind of a new, I hadn't seen that done before. And it was actually incredible how powerful that tool was, especially for the previs department. And so then it ended up to where that also on Sony, I started messing around with Unreal and building some sets and things like that, because there's something called Fab for Unreal, which is this huge marketplace where you can download free stuff and just basically build out a set that you need to kind of just get a camera in there and start working. As far as how I kind of use it in my process, it kind of depends. Like I said, sometimes I don't use it at all. Sometimes I know exactly what I'm doing. I know what the shot is. I know what they specifically need. And so I don't, the fun part about having a proxy is that if you need to get in there and move around, that's kind of the use of it, is, okay, I need multiple perspectives. Because one of the hardest things you'll hear as a viz dev artist, you'll do an amazing, beautiful painting. You'll work in, a whole week just like making it absolutely perfect and done. And it's like, here it is, here you go, I'm finished. And they're like, it would be great if you could just rotate the camera like 5 degrees. It's like, well, this is a 2D painting. Like, I can't do that. And so it's one of those things that, like, having the 3D element can sometimes be really helpful if you know that there's the potential of, like, they might move things around, they might want to see the space. And so that's really helpful for blocking and things like that. So sometimes, like I said, I won't use it. I'll just go straight to design or straight to paint. That's why having your foundation core skills is so vitally important. Like, yes, we can all, like, we could learn 3D, everybody can model it, and you don't have to worry about perspective, but eventually somewhere in your career, you will have to just know how to do the perspective, know how to draw it right then and there without using those tools. So having the foundation, but then making your life easier with Maya or Blender or whatever 3D tool you want to use is very helpful. How I've been using it recently, where I have used it a lot on productions, I'll usually start it with, if I feel like there's not a clear direction about the space from the director or the production designer, like they have an overall view of what they're thinking, I might do a couple doodles and things like that. But building out a proxy to where I can get them into the space to look around is really helpful, from having to go through multiple iterations that don't go anywhere. So I can't talk about my last production too much, but there was one sequence on my last production where they had a set, they had an idea, but basically they gave me the character breakdown of it's his environment, and we need a space that's his. But that was kind of all I had to work with. So I knew his personality. I knew, like, you know, generally how he was in the movie because he was kind of the villain. But building out his villain space, you could go a lot of different directions with that. It could be like a really creepy, cozy lair. It could be this huge, massive, epic, you know, lab space. And so there was a lot of like back and forth of like, there wasn't a concrete idea. And so being able to just get into a 3D space and start adding to it and building out the volume and getting cameras in there was really helpful to work with the directors, because we could sit down and have working sessions where I could just take them through the space. And the director could be like, oh, you know, I was actually thinking this. And then it's like, that's what I want. I want I was actually thinking this, because that gives me something to work from. So that's part of how I've been using it, which when you hear it, it's kind of working more in a previs environment. But for art, that's really helpful. And then for like SpongeBob, we had so many assets working from it to where we could set up our shot very easily. And so for those, I did end up doing a lot of paint over work where I'd set up my shot just for rough layout and things like that, get the camera exactly as I wanted, and then I could just do a viz dev paint over the top of it. So it's kind of like you get to use it in multiple facets, kind of however works best for you. But that's kind of how I've been using it.
Any other questions? Bronx?
How do you like find these projects, or like what do you look for? Like job opening wise when you apply?
Yes, that's
sure.
the $1 million question right there.
Yeah, of course.
It's like so many of the folks in here are just like engaging in this, and they're at the beginning. And what does the beginning look like, and how do you carve out this career?
Yeah, so I mean, my career kind of took a different path than a lot of artists that I've worked with. You know, I graduated from SCAD. I always tell my daunting story of Disney, which I think I told the last class when I came and talk for here. So when I was at SCAD my senior year, I applied for a Disney apprenticeship, and I was one of the finalists. And I was like, I'm set, I'm done. Like, you can't get better than Disney. Like, this is it. At the time, they were just starting work on Rapunzel. And they were sending me emails about who I was going to work with, like, you know, what my general role would be and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, you know, I'm done. Like, this is it. And then 2 weeks before graduation, they came back, and basically I think were originally going to take 5 apprentices, and they decided to only take 2. And I was in the 3 that got like not considered. So then it was 2 weeks from graduation, and I was jobless. And so I ended up, through a friend of a friend, I got a job working at a company called TurboSquid. They do 3D modeling they basically have like a 3D modeling marketplace online where you can go online and you can buy 3D models. And so I got hired on because I had some 3D experience to basically work as a library curator / QA, where I would go through and look through models and see which ones were broken and fix stuff. And I hated it. And so that was the first 2 years of my career, but it was a foot in the door. And that's something that I always recommend to students who are trying to get into this industry. It's just getting your foot in the door. It's like, I always say, get your foot in the door. Like, foot in the door is better than no foot. So like, if it's a PA job, if it's, you know, something related to the industry, learning about the industry and working within in the industry is a huge absolute benefit than not working in the industry at all. So even if it's not your ideal career choice, even if it's not the position you wanted, getting there is the important part. And a lot of artists that I know actually have ended up taking different routes because they started in a different spot. I have a friend who started as a PA in Sony. She wanted to do art, but she started doing PA, and she's now basically an executive producer at Sony, which is nuts because that's like I mean, that's a higher grade pay rate and everything than I will ever reach in my career. So it's always just really being open to, do I want to work in this industry, or do I want to specifically do this one thing? And you might be basically cutting yourself off from working in the industry at all if you're so focused on that one little thing. So from there, I knew a friend who a college friend that I went to school with at SCAD, who was working at a studio called Real Effects. They made Book of Life, they made Freebirds, they made Ugly Dolls, and he recommended me for an apprenticeship. And it was, like I said, it was different times back then. There wasn't the internet so much, there wasn't Zoom calls and interviews, and so they called me about a phone interview because I was living in New Orleans and the studio was in Dallas, Texas, and they said, you know, we'd like to do a phone interview with you on Monday. And I said, no, I'll see you on Monday. And they said, wait, we said a phone interview. And I was like, yeah, no, I'll see you on Monday. I'll be there. So I jumped in my car. I drove 8 hours to get there, stayed in a little motel so that I could go to the studio, with my mindset being, I did not think I was going to get the job. I had spent like 2 years prior to that working at TurboSquid, trying to make a viz dev portfolio, looking at every artist that I wanted to be and trying to figure out holes in my portfolio that I could fill. Like looking at what they had, what I didn't have, what could I do to make myself have that, and just working nonstop at that. And so I was, you know, had no experience and knew I wasn't going to get the job. But I got there, had the interview, and since then, my first mentor, Fred Gardner, old Warner Brothers guy, he straight up told me that I did not have the best portfolio in the group, but my showing up and being so optimistic, so excited about working in the studio, just wanting to meet everybody and see the process, landed me that job. And so I did 6 months apprenticeship and literally sponged everything I could possibly get. And then I got hired there as a viz dev artist and worked there for my first 7 years of my career. And so I tell that story just because, I mean, it's a totally different time now because we have Zoom, things like that. But getting the job is not always going to be the best artist that's out there. A lot of getting the job is being fun to work with, being excited about going into that job, wanting to learn. The optimism, that kind of energy that you put forward makes a huge difference on getting hired for a crew. So like I always recommend trying to, I mean, I know it might seem like it because I've been rambling and talking at you guys for the past however long, but I'm actually a crazy introvert. Like usually after I do one of these talks, I go comatose for like 2 days because I'm just like so much talking.
I think you and I have talked about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like after I do a big talk or a big lecture, it's like, I don't talk to anybody.
It's hard. It's really hard. But part of this industry is not just doing the art and things like that. It's still a job. So I've had to learn over the years how to be personable, how to talk to people, how to like engage and things like that. Because you have to do that in a team. It's not just a single artist working. You're on a team. You're building this world together for viz dev. So I'll talk a little bit more about getting a job now. So I've been very lucky in my career. I always say I am the exception, not the rule. That I have had a very stable career where I've been able to jump production to production to production. Like I said, exception, not the rule. Usually for what ends up happening for me is I'll work on a production for about a year or so. And generally, especially over the last couple of productions I've worked on, usually I'll have maybe 5 to 6 months left on a contract, and it's just kind of happened where someone I've worked with in the industry reaches out about another production. And so then I kind of take the gamble about whether or not I should stay on the production and finish out my contract, or if I should jump onto a different production. And I've made some good gambles and I've made some bad gambles. When I was working at Netflix, I got contacted by Gaumont Animation to jump on a production there. I jumped onto that production, and then 3 months after I jumped on, they shelved the project and laid everybody off. So that was obviously a very bad jump. Vice versa, like I've had the opposite happen where I've decided to jump off of a project, or I've decided not to jump off a project and either that other project got shelved and I was so glad that I didn't go work on it, or I've been able, so when I moved from Paramount at the end of SpongeBob over to Sony, I had maybe 6 months left on my contract for Paramount. But at that point in production, I had already been on for a very long time, and they were just working on lighting keys, which is very fun. I love doing lighting keys, but it's kind of like you're tapering off of the production. So you don't really need as many artists to kind of get through that. And so I decided to switch over to Sony, which in that case ended up being a really great choice for me because I ended up having my longest contract I've had in, my 15 years at Sony. So I got to work there, or since I've worked at RealFX. So I worked there for about 2 years, which is a really long contract in Viz Dev. I will say, and this is going to be hard to hear, it's hard for every student to hear, every job I have gotten, I knew someone. But I also say that to really push forward, the networking is important. And it sucks, but it is important. First off, everyone else that you know who wants to do this job or who's in art or in your classroom, that's networking. So like if there's a bunch of you guys who are into Viz Dev or considering going into animation, knowing each other is the first step. My first job was someone I went to college with at SCAD. And so you knowing everybody that you work with right now or that you go to school with right now is a form of networking, because eventually, statistically, someone at your college is going to be in this industry, and then the rest of you are all going to reach out to that person to try and get a job. That's kind of how this industry works. And then also networking has changed quite a bit in this day and age to where we do have LinkedIn, we have Instagram, we have all of those things. I tell young students all the time, if a student reaches out to me on LinkedIn, and here's what I mean about, this is one of my pet peeves on LinkedIn. When you reach out, hitting the connect button is not reaching out. Like you have to write something, you have to say hi, you have to introduce yourself and be like, hey, I love your work. I really would love to get some advice. Do you mind looking at my portfolio? All that kind of stuff. Like reaching out is actually personally putting forth yourself to someone, either through a DM on Instagram or through LinkedIn to try and network. I always answer those. If someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn and sends me a message and they want me to talk, or they just want to say hi, or they want to connect, I will always do that if they send me a message. But that's part of networking. And the thing that I always say is the worst that can happen, the worst that is they'll just say no, or they just won't answer you. And then you're in the same spot you were before. So a lot of that networking starts early, where you are just even if you don't have a portfolio, you do have a portfolio, like part of getting a job is also getting it out there. Like show your portfolio to everyone. Like literally, like if your mailman is outside, you're like, hey, want to take a look at this? Tell me what you think. Like you should be getting as many eyes on your portfolio all the time. I still do it. I will show my portfolio all the time to friends, to, coworkers, and things like that, just to get different eyes on it, because they're going to see something different in your work than you are. And you're going to start seeing trends about what the best work that you're showing is, what the thing that you do best is. All of that helps to really build a strong portfolio that's going to help you to get a job. So like I said, networking is there's so many more avenues for it now that you should be taking advantage of, because there's tons of them. But so for me, like I said, I've been really lucky. I've gotten to go job to job and things like that. But hopefully you have an easy process of getting into the industry, like just by getting some networking done now.
And I think that the whole the Better Call Saul thing that you did of just driving to Texas, I think that's something that I talk about with these folks quite often. Is just that it's like, I know that there's that advice of going the extra mile. I'm not even talking about, I'm talking about going the extra 50. You know, really make it so that you are putting yourself completely in alignment with the thing that you want. My wife and I were joking about that. I don't know if you've seen the show Better Call Saul.
I have. It's great.
There's just that one. There's so many moments where Jimmy McGill just like Jimmy McGill's, and it's like like when he finds the he finds the shredded documents in the show. I forget exactly at what point it says. He brings them back to Chuck's place, and I promise this is going somewhere. And he takes all of the shredded documents and spends all night by candlelight putting them all back together so that he could read what's on those documents.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think that's kind of the mentality that I think all of you need to have, is just not seeing these roadblocks as roadblocks, whatever they may be, but just digging in and seeing that as an opportunity to really reach for something, because someone else isn't going to do it. You know, like, you can be that person who does it. You know, like I have a couple of different types of students. I have the student that is, I lost my Apple Pencil and I couldn't turn my project in. And then I have the student who's like, I lost my Apple Pencil, so I painted for 20 hours using my index finger in order to be able to turn the project in. And that's the mindset that I'm talking about. It's like,
absolutely,
constantly, little by little, pushing yourself a little bit more every day, you know, and being that person who's like, no, not a phone interview. Like, I know that's what you want. I want to go and see the place. I want to immerse myself in what's going on there. Like, that is huge. I mean, that is the same thing that I tell students when it comes to sending mailers to clients.
Oh, for sure.
You know, you can send that. That's a lot more personable than the email, you know, the email that will probably maybe go to spam. You know, sending an actual mailer to someone so that they can hold that thing. Then it's up to you to ask yourself the question of, like, how many more steps further can I go? Like, I've heard of illustrators sending their favorite dream clients like gift baskets with like little postcards and, you know, like very like, you know, it's kind of like the joke I made with a cousin of mine where it was like, if I print my resume out on 18 by 24 and laminate it, they cannot file that with the rest of the other resumes. It's like a fun way to, like, how can you become noticed, you know? And I just love hearing stories like that where it's like, no, I'm driving to Dallas, I'm doing the 8-hour drive, I don't know what's gonna happen, I love this.
I got literally 2 flat tires on the way, by the way. Oh, and a speeding ticket, which is great. While I was going there.
This morning, literally this morning, it's freezing here. This morning I got locked out of my car with my car on in the parking lot of Todd. And look at me, I'm here. You know, so that's like, I think, you know, for a lot of people, it's like, oh, that's the wrap on the day or whatever. Maybe. Yeah. My point is like, maybe you do have your limit, but continually push that limit. You know, so you can see, like,
for sure. Especially because, like, that's one thing I will say that's very, like, setting the tone for working in this industry. It's not an easy industry to work in. It's not going to be consistent. It's going to be like, we talk about, like, a lot of us biz dev artists talk about, like, always be looking, because we're always looking for jobs. I've never not been looking for a job. I'm always trying to find something else. I'm always talking with other artists about what productions are becoming available and things like that. You know, there's a lot easier jobs out there where you can have steady, consistent work, be employed, and not have to think about those things. So choosing this career path is setting yourself up for, like, okay, I'm gonna, like, you have to have a lot of grit. You have to really work and really push yourself. And at the end of the day, yes, we all want to make pretty art and stuff like that, but it still is a job. And some days waking up and being like, hey, I have to creatively output for the next 8 to 12 hours. And I can't say, I'm not really feeling inspired. No, I have to do it. So it takes that grit and pushing, and that's part of this industry. And that's going to separate the artists who really want to be in this industry and artists who just really love to paint and draw. Because it's not just painting and drawing. That's not the job. So, you know, going that extra mile makes a difference.
I think that's so important for them to hear other people other than me saying that. Because I 100% agree. And I think that's part of the mystique of what we do. And is that it's not a punch in punch. It's not like, oh, I started Viz Dev on Monday at 8 a.m. You know, it's and that's something I was talking to some of my colleagues about recently, is that this career isn't like a moment-based discovery. Like, you don't just like flip it over and there it is. You don't get it as a graduation gift. It's very committing yourself to the active service of being this person. So it's like and I've said this to my groups before, it's like, I couldn't tell you the day and time I fell in love with my wife, you know, that's not, those ideas don't make sense in that way. But like what you're saying, the idea of driving to Texas and networking and communicating with people, you know, you wake up one day and you're all of a sudden like, oh, I'm doing this. Like I'm this dev concept. I'm doing this now.
Yeah, I mean, there's still days where I wake up and I'm like, am I a phony? Like, like, do I? Like, are people going to be like, what are you doing in this industry?
Yeah.
Like, you still have that.
I feel the same way. Like, anytime any of my stuff gets any notoriety, I'm like, wait, do they not know that I'm kind of an idiot? You know, I tell my students all the time, like, they're so much more talented than me. But there you go. It's like, I think that is not as important as I think people made that out to be. One of my mentors told me that talent is fickle. It often stays in its bathrobe until noon. And you know, I know quite a few illustrators who are not that great in my opinion, but they're very successful because they're super driven and they're willing to drive to Dallas, Texas, and get, you know, and get those flat tires and to move beyond that. But I think that's cool to know that and to believe that, because that means that anybody can do it if they're super driven to do it.
Oh, for sure.
It doesn't mean that there's only a select few who are born with some certain kind of gift that none of us can attain.
Well, and biz dev is an interesting field set because if you want to be like a superstar artist, like I would even say more so, this is not the industry for that. Because working in biz dev is very much like you're on a team who's building a world for a feature, like for a film or commercial or even gaming, like, because it's all very similar. You know, we call them concept artists in game versus biz dev, but we basically do the same thing. And you're part of that team building something, so you kind of have to like you have to leave ego at the door and basically be like, I don't care who's making the art, I just want really good art, because that's what the goal is when you're working on a film or you're working on a video game. Like, you're trying to make the thing you're making as good as possible, and whether that's you doing it or somebody else doing it, like on the team, that has to be where your mind is making the best of that thing. And so it's kind of like this. I've known some artists in the industry who have gone into it being in biz dev wanting to be that superstar artist, and then really struggling on teams because they get so competitive and they struggle with working with anybody else, and they get really hurt feelings if somebody else gets an assignment that they don't, and they very quickly are filtered out of the industry because people don't want to work with that. When you're working on a team trying to make a really amazing movie or video game, like, you just want everybody to work together and make cool shit. It's like, it's beyond you, it's bigger than you. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Does anybody have other questions? Yes?
Okay, so about portfolios, I got like a couple of questions.
Shoot,
Since you were saying you're kind of like a jack of all trades artist, like, first of all, how much like work do you include in a portfolio? And what specifically do you include, since you kind of doing everything?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's an interesting question to answer too. So yeah, like I said, I am more of a jack of all trades than a lot of artists. I'm also a little bit of a different artist within the viz dev world because I don't overly have a specific style that I adhere to. I love ever since I started in my career, ever since I was in college, I love jumping around styles. I really enjoy that process. Some days I want to, you know, paint something like creepy and crazy, like something from like Bloodborne or Blizzard, you know, like or Diablo or something like that. And then some days I want to paint something like really, really cute, like from SpongeBob. So I kind of jump around in that arena, which has been interesting for my career because the way that it kind of works is there's a lot of artists who are hired specifically for the artistic style that they do. And that's a very big commodity because we're hiring you, we know what we're going to get from you, we're bringing you on this production to fit into this specific style that we're trying to do. And then there's artists like me who can kind of hop around styles, who can kind of adhere to different things. There's kind of pros and cons of that. The pro for me is I do attribute a lot of that to my consistent career, because I end up primarily doing a lot more production art of like breaking down art and style and things like that, versus doing a lot more of the iconic, like, oh, you know, this is going to be on a big billboard art, because of the fact that I kind of, you know, can fit and break everything down stylistically. So it's one of those ones that I get hired very consistently because they know they can fit me in on a production. But it also does every now and then keep me from, you know, if they're looking for an artist that they want a very particular style, you know, there's often that you can look at my portfolio and it's like, wow, there's so many styles. So like I said, there's pros and cons to being that jack of all trades and jumping around styles. For me, it's been really great because I've had a consistent career from that, but it oftentimes I think can be difficult for some artists living in that same world as me. So as far as like portfolio, you know, like I said, the Viz Dev has kind of exploded to being a lot more of job, multiple jobs in one job. So having a little bit of everything has become a little bit more commonplace. By a little bit of everything, I mean, there's always like, you have a little bit of character design, you have a little bit of environment design and paint, you know, depending on what you specifically want to do. The way that I always talk about portfolios is, if you don't love doing it, don't put it in your portfolio, because eventually somebody will hire you for it. And then you'll be stuck doing the thing that you really don't like doing. So for me, I don't love doing a lot of character work, which is funny because I love doing character work in my personal work. But when it comes to doing like job wise, I really like working in environments and color and paint and things like that. So I tend to keep a ton of character stuff out of my portfolio, because I don't want to get hired to do character stuff. I like to get hired to be an environment concept artist or an environment viz dev painter and focus specifically on that. And so kind of tailoring your portfolio to what you love to do is one of the big things I will say. Outside of that, portfolios are a lot more, especially nowadays with the advent of, you know, AI and being able to do proxy modeling and all of these crazy viz dev tools, a lot more about how you think than what you actually technically like produced. Yes, it has to be good work. You want your best work. Everyone will always tell you, like, you know, pick your 10 best pieces and that's what you should have. I agree with that, but at the same time, I would say just pick your best pieces. Doesn't matter if it's 10, just your best. What you're, you know, what you think is your best is what you should put in your portfolio. But yes, a lot more about what you think. So especially for viz dev, most of what our job is about thinking, because we have to break things down. We have to figure out things. We work with story. We help give them ideas that they can work with and vice versa. So a lot of like the creative process of thinking is way more important than the product. So like, if I see in an artist portfolio a beautiful viz dev painting, I'm like, wow, that's beautiful. How'd you get there? Like, what did you do to get to that point? Like, did you do some thumbnails? Did you do some value sketches? Like, did you try multiple angles? Like, why did you choose this particular layout? Like, I want to see how the process happened. It doesn't have to be the main point. Like, you could have your big, beautiful viz dev painting and then have a couple little thumbnails and a little process points that you did. But even that little bit is just showing that, like, I'm hiring you for how you're thinking, not just because you can pay. Because like, I can find a painter, like they can find painters. There's tons of us out there. There's tons of people who can do what we do. Your mind and your creative process is what they're hiring you for. So the more you can kind of add that into your portfolio, the better.
Yep. Great answer. Was that helpful? Anyone else?
Yeah, you can ask more if you want. That's fine. Like, I know it's building a portfolio is hard.
Well, you did say that you like doing your design in your own personal time, but
yes,
you would like it for kind of the industry. Like, what's
yeah.
there?
Elise hates character design.
I don't hate characters. I cut it out.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. I may be wrong on this, but did you advise? I feel like you advised some of my students to not. You were like, it's crazy. Or
so yeah. So there's still a segregation in the viz dev world between viz dev artists and character designers.
So that's still. The reason why I bring this up is because I think it's probably the most popular.
Of course, it is. Yeah, I get that. It's fun. I love drawing characters. I do, but I also like having a job. So character design is interesting. Like I said, it's still a separated field between character design and viz dev artists. Like character designers get, they get nominated for Annie Awards every year and things like that. Like it's a very, they get the high clout situation. So it's a very saturated field. And the difference between what I was talking about, where I'm a jack of all trades and viz dev and things like that, you don't really have that with character designers. If you're getting hired as a character designer, you're getting hired as a character designer for what you specifically do artistically. So like what your style of character design is what you're being hired for. The length of contract is very short. Character designers get contracts from anywhere between 3 weeks to maybe 6 months. Like that's I mean, I've seen maybe a couple of character designers get a full year contract, but it's rare. So it's very short-term contracts. Like I said, you're going to be jumping around a lot between projects, because that's the job, is jumping around between a lot of studios, a lot of projects to be a character designer. And it is because of the fact that it's just a very saturated field of character designers. There's lots and lots of character designers out there. And so you're just competing against a very, very saturated field, which is very difficult. Not to say you can't do it. You can. You absolutely can. It is possible. It's a harder path, in my opinion, than viz dev. But yeah, it's a choice. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that.
I think maybe we're the only ones who find that funny. Everyone's,
I guess so, yeah.
giving you mean stares right now.
No, I mean, I will say, I'll give you a little bit of tidbits on character design as far as like your portfolio. Big things is character design for viz dev is slightly a different monster than character design for TV series and things like that. If you're working in feature, big thing is always making sure you have obviously 2-legged and then 4-legged, like having animal character design. So quadruped and then biped is an important thing to show you have animal anatomy, human anatomy, making sure those are both part of your process. I still say that, getting in some character turnarounds is helpful, especially if you are going to be bouncing between TV series and animated feature. Having turnarounds is a still very used thing, especially in TV series. So making sure you have some of that in there. Character expressions, of course. So it's the same thing. It's a similar thing to viz dev when you're talking about like how to build your portfolio. It's not just about like, hey, here's this pretty character that I designed. Isn't it great? You have to go through the process of like, okay, I did some sketches. I did some thumbnail silhouettes showing it. I did multiple poses showing action poses versus like subtle at ease poses. I have the character emotional breakdowns. What are they wearing? Did I try different outfits with them? It's all about like going from the big thing, which is like, here's this big, beautiful character design, to the smallest detail, like big to small. And so breaking that down all the way to the core thing. And like I said, it's also a big process of how your thinking is, most important in a portfolio. So
it's like, why does this character look this way?
Yeah.
Why is it holding this weapon? And is the weapon big because you like really big weapons, or is it big because it serves a function? I think that's something that I've noticed a through line with a lot of folks who are in this professionally, is that they've like graduated, I guess, in a sense, or they've moved on from the idea of like, oh, I did it because it looks cool, to I did it because this, because this character lives in this climate on this type of planet, and that's why it has to look that way, and that's why it influences the color and the shape language and so on.
Yeah. And one of the big pitfalls that I've seen in a lot of student portfolios when it comes to character design is they have a beautiful character design, they have some beautiful breakdowns, but they don't consider the process of what the end result is, which is that all these things move. So really knowing range of motion is really important for every character design. It's like you can show me like a really cool character that's standing there, you've got T poses, you've got some, expressions, but like what is their actual range of motion? Are they like wacky, like, Warner Brothers style where they can stretch and squash, or are they range of motion is like much more smaller, it's more realistic? Like having all of those questions answered in your portfolio is really important too.
Anyone else? William?
So for biz dev contracts, do you see any like industry standards when you're looking at contracts? Like what should you look out for? And also, how are you being paid like throughout the contract? Is it for like an hourly rate?
Yeah.
Or are you being paid like they're telling you like a specific amount and that's being paid?
Great question.
So there is kind of a two-part to that. So based on where you are makes a huge difference. Like I said, I work remote, which makes a huge difference because I am not union. So union standards are different working in the industry contract-wise than they aren't. The cool thing about like working union is, like I said, there's a base, like the union makes sure you're paid a certain rate from the start, and they have union standards. You have a little book that says this is how much this position gets paid and so far and so forth. And so there's like that base rate. You also get benefits through the union automatically, and then in between contracts when you're working for the union, all of that stays in place. So you have benefits when you're not working at certain studios and things like that through working through the union. Like I said, I'm not union based because I live in Texas, and I've been remote. Even actually when I lived in Vancouver for a while when I was working on Lego, like I also was not union based. I was, basically the same thing. So the way it works for me specifically is I get hired by the studio, but I am a full-time remote employee. So I get benefits, 401k, all of that kind of stuff. So technically I'm employed by the studio specifically, which makes a difference because the way that studios work, which is there's a whole kit and caboodle, is sometimes like a studio, like Sony Animation is a good example. Sony Animation, they hire all their artists that they hire in California and stuff like that. They're hiring them, but they're paying through the union to pay their artists. When I worked there, was an employee of Sony. I was not an employee of Sony Animation and paid through Sony Animation with the union. I was paid by Sony themselves. So there's kind of like, it's kind of a little wacky for me specifically since I work remote that way. But this has been kind of the process for me, which has been really helpful. That being said, I still go by union standards for pay. So in my mind, since I'm doing the same job, especially because nowadays with the way that the system works, where there's like the hybrid where like when I was on my last feature Sony, I think I went to the studio more than most of the artists on that production, because I even when I'm working remote, I generally try to go out at least once a quarter, so at least 4 times a year, and I will go out just to work in the studio for like a week, get some FaceTime with my art director and production designer and the director, get to know everybody, things like that, because working remote is a out of sight, out of mind situation. So I always try to make sure that I'm getting out there. Whenever there's big screenings, I'll go in and see everybody and things like that and fly out. And so working with Sony, they originally wanted me to move out there, and things like that. And I broached the argument of there's no reason for me to do that because nobody's going into the studio. So I stayed here and was a remote employee working under Sony specifically. But in my mind, since I'm going in as much as they are and things like that, I expect the same pay that they're getting. So I follow union standards, which you could even look up online. You can look up online, go through the union and find out what art directors are getting paid, viz dev artists are getting paid. And then the other way is I'm one of those artists that I really think it's important for artists to talk about equal pay. So I generally will talk with a lot of my friends that I work with about, if I know another person who's working in the production, I'll be like, hey, what's the roundabout, like, what is this specific studio, what is their ballpark amount that they're paying VizDev on this project, and I'll kind of act accordingly with that. And I usually tell the same thing to other artists. If another artist reaches out to me and they're like, hey, I'm looking at taking a job at Sony, do you know what they pay? I'll be like, this is what I'm getting. Just so that we're all kind of in line with each other, because we're all doing the same job. And, you know, I've seen artists in the past who have come onto a production, especially early on in their career, and they're, you know, severely underpaid. And especially at the beginning of your career, that's a tough thing to do, because you end up working so many more hours when you start in the industry, because you want to, you know, put your thumb on, like, hey, keep hiring me. And so to get even underpaid like that is really rough. So generally, like, I always ask other artists, see what the general pay is. I always check with the union and see what their current pay rate is, just to kind of work with that. As far as contracts, they're pretty standard. The only time that contracts can get a little messy is when you're moving, because I generally like to, if I'm going to move for a production, we have something called a kill fee, where you can basically negotiate with the studio, because most studios will offer to give you some kind of compensation to move, which is great. But then this is a very turbulent industry. And so what happens if that production goes belly up? Like, you just moved your entire life to this new place. You might have had to pay some extra money to make it happen. You know, you had to put down a deposit and all of that for rent. So you're in the hole a little bit. So I usually set up a kill fee. If I do something like that, where if the production goes down, they also have to pay me to move wherever I want. And so the hard part with doing that kind of contract work is when you start a production and they're recruiting you, you're working through HR. The second you say you want to change your contract, you move from working with HR to working with their legal department, because contract based, you're going to start talking with legal people. So there's kind of like, it depends on how risky I think the contract is, that I'll make those kind of decisions. Usually for VizDev, I generally don't make any changes to my VizDev contract. I think the only time I've made any adjustments is when I was working, I was doing some side work with another studio. And so I told my main studio, I think this is actually while I was working with Paramount, I told them, like, hey, I'm doing other work for this other studio. I need to add to my contract that you guys are okay with me working with another studio. And they were fine with that. But generally, most studios don't have a lot of clauses against you working freelance. So you just have to be careful about, like, if the contract says you can't work freelance, making sure you're not doing that, or you're adjusting it. The only time that I've seen most people in VizDev really start to focus on changing their contracts is when you get higher up. Most art directors and production designers have very specific things that they do with their contracts. But otherwise, within the VizDev sphere, it's pretty straightforward and standard.
Anyone else? Was this helpful? Heck yeah.
Yay.
Thank
Great.
you so much, Elise.
No
you
problem.
can go back to being introverted, and and I'm gonna break here in just a minute and try to have some lunch or something.
Good.
Decompress and so on. You have no idea how much this means to me when you come to hang with us. It's always so helpful and super informative.
Absolutely. I love to
I'm
do
really
it.
glad that we had some folks asking some good questions today too.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys had great questions.
Thank you so much. Have a great
you,
rest of the
guys.
day. Keep me posted on any kind of feedback and communication you have with our
For
executive
sure.
aide. And if you have any questions about that, just let me know.
Absolutely, will do.
Mega congrats on SpongeBob. That is so
Thanks,
cool.
man.
Like, what a bucket lister. Like, that's like core memory. Amazing.
It is, for
you.
sure. It was awesome.
And yeah, we'll nerd out about animation cells at some point.
Of course.
I'll have to see about maybe trying to get you one and hook you up with one of those things.
Oh, man.
Right. Have a great day, everybody. Y'all are free to go.
Awesome.
And Elise, thanks
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Have a good one.
You too, man. Good to see you.